So right now, when people talk about Jessica Alba, they usually talk about her as a business leader, as the founder of this amazing company, The Honest Company. It's also gone public, as an entrepreneur, very successful. But if you rewind that story about 15 years, the narrative around her looked very different. Because when Jessica Alba first walked into rooms as a founder, like looking for finance or selling her idea, the room had already decided who she was. Which she was. She was an actress, but they couldn't see her differently. They saw a celebrity. They saw a famous person trying something new again. And this is something I notice often when I study success patterns, is that people frequently decide who you are before you even speak. Think about that. Maybe that's happened to you. You arrive somewhere, you walk in, and you know they've already made a decision about you. So the real question becomes, what do you do when the room already has a story about you? Go back to Jessica Alba, because her encounter in that moment when she started The Honest Company, she did something very, very different. And that's what if the story begins there, if the story begins with what she did when she encountered that narrative about herself, we wouldn't have to talk about it. But what's interesting is, why did she start the company in the first place? Because it wasn't actually a celebrity brand. It wasn't a startup by a famous person who wanted to do something new. It started with something really personal. So when Jessica Alba was pregnant with her very first child, and she started researching baby products and things she could use in the household that were safe, there was one moment that she had that really stuck with her. She had a pretty severe allergic reaction to a laundry detergent, but it was marked safe. And that sent her down a whole big rabbit hole. And she researched like ingredients and different products and safety standards and household chemicals, all the things that were involved in, if something says it's safe, how can you actually trust that and use it at home? And what she discovered is what surprised her. So many of our everyday products actually contain ingredients that aren't as safe as the label says. And she decided she wasn't comfortable bringing that into her home or putting that on her baby. So she started looking for alternatives. She wanted to figure out what out there could she use instead, right? And that research actually revealed yet another problem. The safer options that did exist were so expensive they were prohibitive, difficult to find, and usually pretty poorly designed. So it was a very narrow market. And that led her to a different question. If the products that she actually wanted didn't exist, why not build them? And that's how she started The Honest Company. So it wasn't as a celebrity brand. It was actually a response to her own personal need and frustration about what she wanted to use in her home and for her family. But here's actually where the story becomes even more interesting. So having the idea was one thing, but what she faced actually was being taken seriously. And if you know anything about Jessica Alba, like massive, well-known magazines have called her the most beautiful woman in the world, and she's been on the big screen. I mean, she's known, right? So when she talks about how it was for her in those early meetings with investors, like she'd walk in, all prepared, she had her business plan, and the room saw a movie star. They didn't see her as a founder. They certainly didn't see her as a CEO of a company that could be successful at all. All they could see was this image that they had of her that had been presented to them, and they refused to move from that image. Which brings us back to that very moment. What do you do when people have already decided who you are? And maybe you're no longer that, or it's not who you were to begin with. Do you try and convince them? Do you argue with their perception, like engage and say, no, it's not that, and you have to see and try and justify? Or, as Jessica Alba did, do you focus on building something real and let time change their story and the narrative that they are holding? Yeah? So she chose that third option, and then she stayed in the work. She continued. She didn't give up. She was persistent. She partnered with people who were experienced as entrepreneurs. She threw herself into product development and supply chains and ingredient standards and regulatory compliance, all the things that are involved in creating a line, right? And so that wasn't like licensing her name to something and then they ran with the Jessica Alba line. She actually dug into and built a really successful company. So before we go farther, I'm curious about something. Have you ever walked into a room where people had already decided who you were? Maybe because of your job or your background, maybe your age, or your past successes or your past failures, or what company you came from, or whatever. If that's happened to you at all, go ahead and mention it in the comments. I'd like to read about that, because that moment when perception shows up, actually it's developed before you even arrive. It's something that a lot of people experience, and then what do they do with that? So if we come back to Jessica Alba, if that perception of her was so strong from the get-go, you might wonder, well, when did it change? Like, what was the impetus? And the actual answer is it wasn't a single moment. It actually accumulated. It grew. And the Honest Company launched in 2011 with a subscription for baby products. And then from there, it expanded. It started gaining traction. And then they went into diapers and personal care products and household goods, which is one of the things that she needed, right? And then the partnerships, the retail partnerships followed, like Target and Whole Foods and all these national big chain retailers. And with that came credibility. And gradually the conversation started to shift. So it became no longer was it the actress that was launching a brand or lending her name to a brand, but actually this woman has founded a company that's successful and it has a product that really serves people. So the real point came in 2021, actually, when the company went public and they gave an IPO, right? And suddenly that narrative that people had been holding looked very different. Jessica Alba wasn't just an actress experimenting with a business idea. She was a founder who built a publicly traded company. That is not an easy thing to do. And when that happens, something very interesting occurs. The room that had its narrative about you totally revises that original story. And that brings us to a deeper question. What's beneath that story, right? Was Jessica Alba's biggest challenge building a company? Or was it building the credibility with people who had already categorized her? Was it standing true to herself when she had already been peg-holed to be a certain way and a certain person in the world? So from my perspective, that's the real lesson here. Because most people will encounter a moment where others decide who they are before they even speak. That happens to me all the time. I don't even need to open my mouth, just walk in a room and people have made their decision about me. Whether it's about me personally or it comes from their past of people that look like me or sound like me or whatever it is. So when that happens to you, you have a choice. You can spend your energy arguing with that perception or trying to overcome it, or you can build something so real that the perception that they're holding eventually has to change. And you don't have to build a company to do that, right? You can just be you without apology and without arguing with their perception. So Jessica Alba, she didn't argue with the label that they had given it. She simply outgrew it. She just went beyond it. And that's why her story resonates. Not because she left Hollywood, and not just because she started a really successful company, but because she stuck with it. She stayed in the work so long that the room had to change its mind. That the people, the naysayers, the ones who had sway were forced to see her differently. And that's something worth thinking about. At least I think it is. Because if we actually have that kind of control over how we impact the world by knowing who we are and not letting that impact our walk, that's powerful. So if this perspective resonated with you, take a moment, like the video and subscribe. It helps other people find the content as well. Because on this channel, we're not just looking at success stories at all. We're looking at deeper patterns behind them. What helps people move in the world and bring their potential to the world in a big way that also serves them while they're serving others. And the next time that you walk into a room where you think people already know who you are or they have their narrative about you, you may remember something very simple. You don't have to correct the story. Sometimes you just have to be yourself and build beyond it. Thanks for listening. Be well.